great to hear, Carl, in the first instance, would be how would you describe financial planning? So if somebody was interested in becoming a financial planner, how would you describe the role of a financial planner to somebody?
Yeah, so super good question. I think the easiest way to describe that role, my favorite way, is just an analogy with mountain guides, right? That real financial planning. So two things. One, real financial planning is about the alignment of someone's use of capital, and capital always has an asterisk by it. And under the asterisk is time, money, energy, and attention. So those four forms of capital we have. So aligning somebody's use of capital, and I think of this as a Venn diagram. Like in one circle, there's the use of capital, and in the other circle is what's important to me, or values, or purpose. Purpose is my favorite word. So if I can align the use of capital with someone's purpose, that to me is real financial planning. Now, there's a whole bunch of work to be done there. It's like helping somebody, it's not really discover, it's rediscover their purpose. And I think of that as goal clarification over time. It turns out people don't know what their goals are. So like one of the huge things that financial planners do that's valuable is helping people rediscover goals and at a deeper level purpose. So if you have, and then once you've identified, and it's not really once, the never ending process of identifying goals, right? So that thing's moving. That side of the equation is moving and changing. And this is where we'll get to the guide in a minute. That piece of landscape is moving and changing. I thought that living by the sea was going to be really important. So we tried it. I'm just, role playing here a bit. Like I thought that living by the sea was really important. So we tried it. Well, we're not sure we like it as much as we thought. We're actually mountain people. Well, that's an interesting piece of purpose that's now changed. So that's changing. And then once we've sort of got some sense of where it is, at least presently, we're going to align our use of money, time, energy, and attention. And that's the never-ending alignment. And the reality is, as humans, if that was a Venn diagram, there's often no overlap in the circles, right? And so us working with clients to get those circles overlap, that's my favorite definition of real financial planning. And the way to think about this as far as guiding goes is, and this is really important for your listeners to understand, sometimes when you think of financial planning, you just think of spreadsheets and calculators. And that's maybe the nice thought you have. You might actually think of just some slimy person trying to sell you financial products. And the truth of the matter is, it's not about spreadsheets and calculators, and it's not about products, right? It's about people's lives. And if we start to understand what we're really trying to do is align use of capital with what's really important to people, we start to get a sense of how beautiful this job is. Now, then we have to start thinking about, instead of thinking we can draw a 30-year line in the sand, which is sort of what a financial plan often is, like carved in stone, and we're super focused on the precision of it and the calculator and the spreadsheet, we realize that all of that stuff is moving. So really, you're not a map drawer, right? You're a guide in a changing landscape, and the landscape itself is changing. So that, to me, just like, that's why I get so fired up about this profession, is because it's so dynamic. It involves money is just an entry point. It's just a righteous trick, if you will, into the conversations that I don't care at all about money. Like, I've spent the last 25 years on TV pretending to be the person who cares about money. I don't care about money at all. I only care about it because it's an entry point to the stuff that really matters. And it happens, unfortunately, in our society, globally speaking, it happens to be the entry point into the stuff that really matters. So that's how I think about planning overall. I mean, we go deeper on any one of those threads, but that's how I think about financial planning overall.
I think that's super interesting, and that aligns with my thinking. I love the way that you're explaining that a financial planner is like a guide, like a mentor, taking somebody on a journey, and that journey changes all the time. We can't control what's going to be there in front of us.
Yeah.
And you're there to help guide them as they go through. And obviously ensuring that their financials also match up with the road that they're on, in line with their purpose. But those purposes change over time. And you're there to help them discover that, as well as help them financially prepare for anything that might well happen in the future. Is that what we're saying here?
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing you mentioned there, Sam, that's important to remember is that the client, and your listeners will get this, and the people who are thinking about being in the industry will think, oh, could that possibly be true? Because it's not what you often see, when you think of, the financial advisor coming from the city. The client is the hero of this journey, not the advisor. And we've got to always keep that in mind. We're just the guide. And a real guide, to be honest, like a real guide knows that the client may not even need us. Like they could survive maybe, right? But we're just there. If we can just make subtle tweaks, or sometimes they're huge tweaks, but often it's just subtle little tweaks around the edges. Those subtle tweaks compounded over time are massively valuable, right? Like I just think of it as like a subtle core. If you think about, just pretend a trip from Los Angeles to New York City, that's across the American continent. If I'm off by just a teeny bit to start, just a teeny bit, right, I could end up in Florida instead of New York, which, unless you were headed to Florida, would be bad. And so these little course corrections where the client's the hero of the journey, it's their journey. And sometimes their journey won't match with our values. And by values, I simply mean like, maybe I want my house paid off and that's all I really care about. And maybe that's really important to me, but it may not be. This client may be saying, I don't really care about that. I want to take this trip with my kids. And I can see in the spreadsheet that this trip for the kids may not make sense financially, but on the emotional balance sheet, it makes a ton of sense. And so it's not, I have to be careful not to say, no, you should really pay down the mortgage, and really try to help clarify why the trip, how important is this? You've been talking about it for a long time. What would it look like? Paint a vision of it. Okay, you know what? Let's make the most of that investment. Like, what's the return we're hoping for? Lifetime memories, connection with my kids. Okay, cool. That's the return we're hoping for. That sounds like a great investment. Let's make that, right? Like, so we're guiding this journey, but it's their journey. It's their purpose. It's their values, not our own. That's actually quite hard to keep. I often say, like, keep your values off your clients' plans. It's actually quite hard. And it's another beautiful piece of the puzzle here as we think about this job.
When you sit down with clients, and you mentioned something about money being like an entry point.
Yeah.
So when they come to a financial planner, or get to this stage where they sit down with a financial planner, and that money is that entry point, do you find they are consumed by money, in the sense that it's driving their decisions and perhaps stressing them out or worrying them or making them anxious? And that from uncovering and discovering more around perhaps their belief system, it sounds like what you do at the moment, you dig a little bit deeper of the things that they are passionate about, the things outside of money, the idea of this obsession, if you like, to have enough money. I'll be happy when I have enough money. Do you find that sort of starts to leave them, and that you start to bring out the true individual of who they want to be and where they really truly want to live their life? You mentioned there as an example somebody that really, really loves the idea of this trip, this idea of going on a trip with the family, and the return on investment on that is lifetime memories, connection with children, things that you can't buy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when somebody comes to you and they are at the point of entering a conversation with a financial advisor, my assumption, and the way I look at marketing, branding, and everything in the UK, it's always geared towards the money first. And in the UK, a financial advisor doesn't particularly want to deal with somebody who doesn't have enough money. And it creates this kind of divide then between what you're trying to do, which is create a lovely future for somebody where they value their time and that money plays a part in it. But there's this kind of elitist approach in the UK where, and I'm speaking roughly, you might agree with me here, Paul, or not, but the average investable assets that a financial advisor is really interested in the UK is about 250K, and it feels elitist, and it feels as if there's so many people out there that would benefit from this type of financial planning that you offer, which is this well-being approach, and they're getting left behind. I know that kind of asked a few questions all wrapped up into one there. Did it make sense?
Yeah, there's a couple threads to pull on. So one is, it's important, and this, I found this to be especially true. Well, it's true all over the world, but it was definitely true during the time I lived in London. Nobody comes into a financial advisor office asking to cry on their couch.
No.
Nobody comes in and says, help me clarify my life purpose.
Yeah.
Or help me with my goals. No, nobody does that. So I'm a big fan of, instead of trying to redefine financial planning out there in the market, which is a great long-term goal, I'm a big fan of greeting them with empathy where they are. They come in with a presenting problem, and the presenting problem is often around portfolio performance, or it could be around something they're thinking about in the UK, particularly around property. It could be that I sold a business and I don't know what to do with this pool of money. Any of those really tactical things that are often sort of like thought of as tactical, and often, frankly, performance driven. It's something to do with a product and performance. So we get to greet them where they are. And I think it just looks like Sam, me saying that, Sam, that's really important part of your overall picture here. And I understand why that's important. It's important to me too. In fact, I think I'm really good at what the question you're asking, and we're definitely going to get there. And would you mind if we back up? Right. So there's the righteous trick, right? And I use the word righteous trick very carefully. I don't mean bait and switch. A bait and switch is in service of the advisor. A righteous trick is in service of the client. So I'm just trying to help them understand that this presenting problem, it's a little bit like showing up at the doctor and sort of wanting to argue about which high blood pressure medicine I should take if I still smoke. Right. And the doctor is going to say, they're going to engage with me on this debate about which medicine would be best. And then they're going to slowly, sometimes it's a punch in the nose. Sometimes it's an empathetic hug, depending on what I need. It's a chess match a little bit, right? But if they're going to slowly take me to a spot where what the real problem here is, we can keep treating the symptoms. These presenting problems are all just symptoms, right? Or we can get down to the real problem. And there's a craft in that. There's a craft in leading someone from what they thought you did as a job. So we can run around out in the public and say, actually, financial planners are really life coaches. It's great. I'm happy that people are doing that. Financial well-being is taking off in the UK, starting to get a foothold in the UK. I love all that. That's amazing. And on the ground, a real financial planner may be better off greeting somebody at the presenting problem, and then slowly leading them down this path where they understand that presenting problem was just a symptom of the fact that we don't have clarity. So one last analogy, right? And I, in the UK particularly, I got this question all the time. Advisors would be, with their arms folded, sort of we don't do that here. We don't talk about our feelings. We don't. And I was like, I understood it. I said, I got the question often enough. And I started getting that question 10 years ago. So I got the question often enough, and I've got enough friends in the UK that are in this industry that I don't buy it. I don't buy it. Now, it may be we're not quite used to doing it, maybe a little bit more, but we're still talking about humans. And if we can unravel that onion just a little bit, we can get to what really matters. And that's where the real value is. That's where what you end up seeing what happens to clients is I used to call it the financial pornography detox program, right? And I would tell clients that they'd entered, on the way out of the first meeting, I'd be like, hey, by the way, you've entered the financial pornography detox program. I'd sort of chuckle about it and say, what that means is there's going to come a time 6 to 18 months from now where you're going to be watching the news like you used to. And you're going to sort of think to yourself, this doesn't really matter to me anymore. All right. And you may even get to the point where you see it as entertainment. And once you get there, you'll get a whole chunk of your life back. And you realize, and then you've exited the program. So the last little analogy I'll use is, most of the industry, the financial services industry, is really busy, and we've trained clients to think this is our job, debating on whether we should take a plane, a train, or a car on a trip. And we think that's the job. Let's just debate the value of the plane, train, or the car. And what a real planner understands is like, that's an interesting debate. Thanks for coming today. I understand that debate. It's a really important decision. Would it be okay if we decide where we're going first? Right. And because if we decide where we're going first, the decision will become much easier about whether to take a plane, a train, or a car. It turns out, if you're going to France, you're probably going to want to take a train or a plane. The car may be a little harder. I know you can, but it may be, but that decision is much easier if we decide that you're going to France versus if you're going to Cornwall, right? Like, different decision. So that to me is the trick there, is understanding that interplay between the presenting problem, the plane, the train, the car, and the fact that clients have been trained by us to think that that's what actually matters. That's all they do on TV, right? Is debate the plane, the train, or the car. And then slowly teaching them that, like, what really matters is, like, can we get clear about where we think we're going? And then that will become easier.
Oh, I like that. That was good.
But it's such a great point. I think in an earlier podcast, Sam and I talked about goals and the fact that I think there's a phrase that you use, Carl, which is, if you ask someone what their goals are, it just makes the hair on your neck stand up. Like, no one, on the spot, what are your goals? It's just such a unnatural conversation point. But that is the destination. That's what we're trying to define. What's most important to you? What's important to you in these different areas of your life? Yeah, it's not something that people have got on their fingertips.
No, we've never been. Nobody's ever. I mean, we don't talk about money, period. Let alone the purpose of it, and all the. I mean, you're unraveling a whole bunch of family history, and so I think goals. You're right. Like, nobody likes being asked. I think we should banish the question, like, what are your goals?
Of course.
I think we should teach people what their goals are by asking them about purpose. Something like, hey, could we back up, Paul, for a minute? Like, I understand this performance and your guy down the street, you're upset with him. Like, I totally get it, and we'll get there. But could we back up a little bit? Like, this may sound like an odd question, Paul, maybe even slightly uncomfortable because you may have never thought of it. But just curious, what does money mean to you? Right. And then we can now that will lead to things like, gosh, that's, and it'll be very uncomfortable at first. It always is. And that uncomfort, I used to think of that as a sign that I was doing something wrong. And now I've realized it's a sign I'm doing something right. Like, a good question by definition is something that people have never been asked before. So I would lean into that discomfort where I said, Paul, what does money mean to you? And you may like fidget around a little bit and say, I don't know. I mean, I just want to buy some more property. Like, yeah, totally get it. Buy more property. That's really important. Let me write that down. And we may put some framework around that in a little bit, Paul, and maybe we'll call that a goal. But why would buying more property be important? Like, and I'm not going to let you off the hook, but I'm going to do it gently. And sometimes it will be a punch to the nose. I mean, just like, Paul, listen to me. I'm not talking to you about, but most of the time it's going to be a gentle, empathetic dance, really. Why is money? And then you may say something to me like flexibility. Money equals flexibility. Like, if you ask me that, I would tell you freedom. And I would tell you a specific type of freedom, time and location. Freedom are what money means to me is time and location freedom. But I've been doing this a long time. So I may just say freedom. And you would say, oh, that's interesting, Paul. Tell me a little bit more about that. Like, what does freedom mean? Like, if I asked 10 people what freedom meant, they'd all say something different. What does it mean to you? We're slowly defining it. They may say something like, I never want to be a burden to the kids. Now we're at a really interesting spot where we could say, hey, Paul, would it be okay in a minute? I'm going to write down never want to be a burden to the kids. In a minute, I'd like to put some framework around that. And when we put some framework around it, we're going to call it a goal. Is that okay? Like, never being a burden to the kids. We're going to define what that means. Like, how much does it mean a month? Like, what does it mean? And when we do, we'll call that a goal. Would that be okay? Right? So that's much different than sitting in your foyer with an intake form that says, what are your financial goals?
Yeah,
It's a completely different experience.
It's the Baccarat ladder up and down to define the goals.
Absolutely. And let's just give a call out too. Like Bill's a master at that. And you can learn a lot from that process. And George Kinder and Dan Sullivan and John Bowen, like they've all done great work around that.
Awesome question askers. Yeah. There's one thing that you said in there, and I just want to share something I picked up on LinkedIn recently, because like I've used a discovery tool that prompts people, and one of the kind of prompts was around not being a burden to your children. It's something that is quite important to people. But I saw a post on LinkedIn recently that literally blew my mind, and it was a guy who said that he'd actually cared for his dying mother for the last like X number of years, and so that's the burden that you're trying to avoid your children having. But he reflected on it, and he was saying that as a result of having done that, having looked after his mother, and she'd passed, so he'd been relieved, quote unquote. But he was saying as a result of that chapter in his life, he's now a better father, a better husband, a better man. So even I guess thinking, what struck me as a really perfectly sensible and noble goal. Yeah. There's kind of layers beneath it.
Totally. Makes perfect sense to me. Like that would match experiences I've heard people having. And it is interesting that sometimes the goals that we set, like I don't want to be a burden to my kids. In some instances, men are particularly bad at this, right? Like, I'll never let on that I have any emotional weakness. And we're very literally denying our friends the opportunities to be of service and to a deeper connection. And so, I think that's true, but that's just an example of a goal that might change over time. And so that's why this false sense of precision that we have in the like we have a sense of physics envy, like we want to find the law of gravity so it will all make sense as financial planners. I think this idea, that's why I say goals are guesses, because it suggests to the mind that it's okay when they change. Like we're going to put a stake in the ground, and adults have to be like, I'm super committed to that goal, and it's going to change. Like adults have to be okay with two competing truths that are true at the same time. That goal is really important, and I'm okay to changing it. Those can both be true at the same time. My financial plan is the best plan ever written, ever, and it's wrong. Those can both be true at the same time. And I think that's where we need to mature a little bit as planners, is understanding that what we do is it demands that we accept two competing truths at the same time.
I think within that, it's such an interesting point, Carl, but I think you can almost unpack and rephrase the goal. I guess an example of that I really like is around kids. I think all three of us are fathers. And so one of the things that I might, if I saw a financial planner, I might get on the piece of paper, like I want to help my children with education. Like they're in private education at the moment. Great thing to plan. We can put X on it. We can build a plan around it. But in all actuality, like, is that the goal? Like private education, you can dig deeper in its similar way that you use the Baccarat ladder. So why do I want to provide private education? Well, because I want to give my kids a good start in life. Well, why do you want to give a good start in life? Well, you want them to be happy and fulfilled. So, and where you get to is a different articulation of the goal. What you actually want is for your children to achieve the potential and lead happy lives. So the way that you achieve that, it's like you were saying earlier, that's your choice of vehicle. So do you choose the plane? Do you choose the private education? Do you choose life experiences? Do you choose philanthropic endeavors? Do you choose how do you accomplish that? Now you've got a different definition of what it is that you're trying to do.
Completely. Yeah, we get so caught up in the tactic or the product, or like the analogy we used earlier, the vehicle, that we forget to get clear about why we're doing this in the first place. Somebody on my team, my COO, is always asking, always taking a minute when we get deep tactically, like strategically, we're going to do this, this, and this. She's always taking a minute to say, wait, could you back up and remind me what's the problem we're solving for here? And that question's always super helpful. Like, oh, wait, it turns out the problem we're solving for here is not that. Like, we went down this huge rabbit hole. And I think we do the same thing with our money all the time. So I think that's super smart.
A lot when I sit back and listen to you guys, right, and break it down even simpler, it's this avoidance of pain, isn't it? And this seeking of pleasure being like a life without pain, a life without problems. And avoiding pain, like you say now, but we send our children to private. I want to send my child to private school to give them the better life. Well, what does like you said, define what the better life actually looks like? Is a tougher, harder life better than one which is full of privilege? So when you actually start to dig a bit deeper, it is quite simply just our human and innate ability to want to avoid pain and to try and seek an easier route, an easier path.
I mean, I think we get confused about that it turns out that the easier path is not the more rewarding path.
No,
and
I've learned that.
I've spent a lot of time thinking about like, I mean, I remember toying around. I try to write. I mean, look, Twitter may be the vehicle, but the goal underneath is this sort of like, how close can I get to business poetry, right? How close can I get to Zen koan? And this idea that hard is the point, right? There are plenty of things in my life that the very reason I'm doing them is because they're hard. Like, making them easy defeats the purpose. So I don't want the mountain. I do a lot of work, I spend a lot of time in the mountains, and I'm training for a big objective that's really, really hard. It's so hard that there's no way in my current state I can do it. There's no way. And so in a very real sense, that objective, actually the objective almost doesn't even matter, except as it's a forcing function to force me to become a different person. Because the current state has to die and the new state has to be born. Well, I get tremendous, like if you tried to make that easier, I don't get the value that I'm after. So I think Michael Easter wrote this great book called The Comfort Crisis. He's going to be a guest on my show next on Thursday. And the entire point of his book is that we have a crisis of comfort. And I think the only way to, it's a very interesting point, just like in a client conversation, I want my kids to go to private school. I want them to have all this opportunity. And often that person you're talking to, I mean, it's a little different in the UK because there's such a rich tradition of those sorts of things. But often in the States, the person that you're talking to is the first generation of people that would have enough money to think about private school, because it wasn't a thing for us. And so you back up and like, well, did you go? And the biggest concern we see here is, am I ruining my kids with this easy path? And because they're at a high likelihood of becoming, I heard somebody say the other day, this is farm language, I hope it's okay, but I heard somebody say the other day, like, my kids are my kids have a very high probability of becoming assholes. And he was like, I got to figure that out, because I would have been one if I was growing up like them. Right. And so I think, again, to me, the point of this conversation is like, what's underneath it? What's really the value we're trying to see in the world? Is there a different way? So I love the idea. One game I would play with clients all the time would be, oh, that's a really interesting goal. We've defined it really well. What would be the opposite of that goal? Like, just to open up the mind to like, what's the purpose of that goal? Let's remind ourselves why we're doing that. Like, is there a different way? If we can get to the value is, I want the kids to be, I want the kids to be awesome humans. I want them to have a successful life. Is there a different way of reaching that same value? Right now, you think private school is the way. Is there a different way? Just opening ourselves up to like, wow, geez, it turns out that, maybe instead of taking that vacation every year, we're going to go do something hard. So anyway, I love that discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. I guess on that, I think one of the areas that can really inform great financial planning is positive psychology. So the work from Martin Seligman and others. Yeah. And when you were talking, Carl, about the mountain and the challenge, it just reminded me of the difference between seeking pleasures and seeking gratifications, or that experience of flow, which is where you lose sense of self, you lose sense of time. And that is absolutely about applying yourself to challenges and ideally helping others according to the positive psychology research.
Yeah, for sure. Just matched challenges that are nicely matched to your current state.
Strengths.
A little bit harder than you think are possible, but not too hard so it doesn't discourage you. Not too easy so it isn't a challenge. Like finding those states, we all know where they are. Like they're magic. They can be playing the piano. It can be climbing a mountain. I find it particularly in sports on water where the medium itself is in flow. It can be writing, so whatever those things are, finding, I think there's an element, to me, there's an element of, at least on a professional level, I love doing things that may not work. In fact, if I'm sure that it will work, I'm actually not interested. Now I'm convinced that it will work or else I'm not going to engage. Like, I'm like, I think I can pull this off, but there's always this, I think. And in these moments, sometimes there's like, I don't know, like I'll get home at night and something will trigger and I'll just be like, this is not going to work. But that stuff has to be around for me. Like I want to strip away, because new and novel work, doing something that's never been done before, there's no way. As humans, we're always trying to put ground beneath our feet. Like we're always trying to find the 7 hacks to writing a bestseller. Like, and the reality is the only real hack is groundlessness. No ground beneath your feet, because if you do truly new and novel work, there's no path to follow. And that's the only thing I'm actually interested in, is I don't want to follow a path. Now, I say that, and then there's these moments where I'm like, dude, could please for once, I could just follow a path. But all I need is a good night's sleep. And the next morning, I want to get back on the pathless path. And I think that's, as it relates to clients, like helping them understand that rules of thumb are great. And my experience is going to be valuable to you. But largely, this is your plan. And we don't have to think about what we saw on Instagram. We don't have to worry about how, Harvard manages their endowment. Like, we don't have to worry about what the silly guy said on the Financial Pornography Network. All of that is interesting, but we got to get to this spot where we take a deep breath and we say, like, what do I want to do? What's the thing I want to see in the world? How do I want my kids to grow up? Do I like driving my old beat up car? And the only reason I feel tempted to replace it is because everybody else cares. Like, how can I get clear about me? Because that's the only place. And that's a never ending journey, which is back to the people who are listening to this that are thinking about getting in this industry. That's why this journey is so beautiful and so rewarding, is it's never ending. And so you look back with clients on their lives, and I now have this experience where I have clients that, I had 20 years ago, and they have pictures for me. Remember when we built the pottery studio? Remember when I retired and I learned to paraglide at age 58? I know who that is. It's Dan, right? I know Denise built a pottery studio as part of her plan. Right? I know Dave and Diane took a cross-country trip sabbatical when their kids were young instead of waiting till their kids were old. Like, I have those postcards. That's actually what planning is about. It's about that. Sure, there were spreadsheets behind that, but it's about the pottery studio of Denise's, right? That's what it's about.
So like empowering the purpose.
Yeah, for sure.
Carl,
for sure. Yep.
You strike me as quite a deep spiritual man. You strike me as somebody who knows himself really well. You come across with kindness, compassion, and you act with service. The position of financial planning to you is service to others through kindness and compassion, to help people discover who they truly are and using that vehicle to help them achieve more. Where did that come from? When did it start? Were you always like that? Did you change in your career? Was there a point where all of a sudden you changed? Sometimes that change often comes out of discovery, like hitting a rock bottom or a bit of pain or something like that. I'm really interested to hear, were you born like this?
Well, I mean, first of all, thank you. That's super kind of you. It's really gratifying to hear that kind of thing more often the last couple of years. I don't look, I'm uncomfortable talking about, but there's a big financial advisor in the US, Josh Brown, who, the only financial advisor I know that has more than 1 million followers on Twitter. And he recently referred to me as Saint Carl, which I'm not saying that to pat myself on the back, but like hearing that kind of stuff is super gratifying. And I don't know, I think I've always been really curious. I've always been really into people doing their thing, and I've had a low tolerance for walking around like a zombie, like like sitting in the cubicle and looking at my phone all day. Like I just want to like grab people and say, don't you know, like, look, there's this big world out here. And I have this real firm belief that everybody has a purpose, and that we just forget it. It gets beat out of us in elementary school. And then if elementary school doesn't take care of it, like society finishes it off. Like, I'll go back. When are you going to get a real job? Right? Like, go back to being responsible. And the people I've always loved, and I didn't really realize this until the last couple of years. I didn't realize I have a collection of them. Like, I have pictures and little articles I've snipped. And like, when I went back and looked through them, they were always these wild-eyed, crazy people, like out doing stuff that mattered. Now that could be, I realized I didn't care. I call it the thing. Like, they all had a thing, and I'm thing agnostic. I don't really care what the thing is. I just care that you have one. And I mean, I remember running in, we lived in New Zealand for 4 years, and I remember running into I don't even know what it was, the Olympic or the national badminton team. I don't know if there's an Olympic badminton team, but these were like the New Zealand best badminton players in New Zealand. And they were so excited about it. I don't care at all about badminton, right? But I could spend all night listening to them talk about badminton. So there's that. And then I guess the other piece would be like, we had a really tough, when you say rock bottom, like I hadn't connected these dots, but we had a really tough time in the financial crisis personally. And I learned a lot about empathy and judgment and just extending, like, it's so easy to look at somebody's financial choices and think, oh, how stupid. And then you realize you have no clue what's going on behind the scenes. Like, I have a friend, like, quick story, a dentist friend. His name's Todd. And Todd was always spending a lot of money on ski trips. I remember it. And I was always like, gosh, that seems so irresponsible, because I knew Todd should, quote unquote, should be saving more. And one night, late at night, we were having a conversation around a fire, and I asked him, I'm like, Todd, what's up with it? Like, don't you feel irresponsible? He just was like, mate, if you had any clue, like, I'd be dead if it weren't for these ski trips. Like it's the only, right now with my marriage and my things that are going on, like, it's the only thing I've got. And so then suddenly your heart opens and you're like, oh, I get it now, right? Like, is there a better way to solve that problem? Sure, whatever. But who am I to decide that? So that really came out of having some really tough financial experiences myself, and realizing, like, and seeing the judgment and the stories that would be written, because I was a relatively public figure at the time. I was writing a column for the New York Times. And so there was lots, like 9,000 comments on the story that I wrote about it. And there was lots of stories and you just read them and be like, that's not anything close to what happened. So then you suddenly realize, like, it's never my place. So that may be a piece of it. Hopefully that helps.
No, I like it. I love that. I loved what you said there about curiosity, and that you've always been a naturally curious person. I don't know whether or not it's the same in America, but in the UK, it's always kind of keep your nose out of other people's business.
Yeah.
Curiosity kills the cat. And we aren't really encouraged to be curious and to ask questions and to delve deep. But the thing that I've found is that when I'm curious, it's an innate, deeper connection with another human being. Because when I go deeper and I become curious, I become interested in them. Therefore, it's no longer about me. It's about them. And I learn so much from them. And as I'm doing that and I'm listening, I feel great. Oxytocin's released in the body. I feel fantastic. They feel fantastic because I'm listening to them. Oxytocin's released in their body, and therefore there's a deeper connection. And whenever I listen and I'm curious, and you mentioned it there, that heart chakra opens up. My heart opens. And if someone's ever experienced what it feels like to have your heart open, it's a powerful thing. It feels like something's rushing out of your body and either leaving you or rushing into your body and filling up your cup. So I can really relate if that's what you feel when your heart opens, and the connection that you have with another human being is so amazing and powerful,
Yeah. Sam, would it be okay if I just tell a quick story?
Of course you can.
So just related to that, because I think it's really important. And the UK thing's always so funny to me. We don't curiosity and we don't talk that way. And we only invest in real estate and all these things that people say about people. And the truth is, I had some of that. We'd move back to London in a heartbeat because we had some of the deepest conversations, and it felt like you could go there quickly, and because people were interested in the human condition. And let me just tell you a quick story about, and especially for your audience, financial planners, and then anybody who's thinking about getting into it. So this is one of my, so I've got this friend, Aaron, who I would help occasionally. He would have financial questions. So he wasn't a client, but close. And Aaron came to me, and I could tell you, I don't know if hundreds is an exaggeration, but I could tell you 100 stories like this. Aaron came to me and said, "Gosh, Carl, I don't get it. We'll just call his wife Sally. His wife has a really unique name, so we'll just replace it with Sally." Aaron came to me and said, "I just don't get it. Sally's always going on about a new car, and I don't understand. She wants this new fancy car." He's like, "She doesn't really care about any of this stuff anywhere else. Our house is great, but she doesn't care about living in the best neighborhood. She doesn't really care. Clothes are great, and she always dresses awesome, but she doesn't really care about brand name. I just don't get it. What is it with this car?" He's like, "It's getting so bad. It's the number one thing we fight about. Every time it comes up." He's like, "In fact, the other day, it was it blew up into this huge thing." And I was like, "Gosh, that's so interesting. Aaron, I just wonder if what's behind that, what's," and it dawned on Aaron to ask, just be a little bit more curious and ask a couple more questions. And so one time he's having he has the opportunity to ask more questions to Sally. And he said, "I don't get it. The car, it doesn't really match everything else. And we can't afford it. It's putting a lot of pressure on me. So it's really causing a problem." He's in his long-winded introduction way to ask a question. And Sally's finally like, "Aaron, you don't understand. And I apologize that you've misunderstood this, or I've miscommunicated this. But when I was younger, it's funny, I get emotional thinking about this. My dad, and the reason I get emotional is because of the experience of suddenly the empathy that opens up. My dad always drove old beat up cars. And I remember pulling in front of it. If you can imagine, in the States, we call it's junior high. Just think of your school when you were 12, 13, 14. It's I remember my dad dropping me off when I was 13 years old in front of the school, all the other kids getting out of their cars. The bus was unloading, kids everywhere, and the car wouldn't start when he went to leave. And I remember how embarrassed I was. Sorry, I didn't expect to be emotional. I remember breaking down on a country road and having to walk for a couple of miles to the nearest payphone back then. I didn't mean new, Aaron. I meant reliable. And suddenly you can feel it now. Aaron, my friend, is like, "Oh my gosh, of course, right? Of course. How do we figure that out? I didn't know." And that experience where suddenly you have understanding, and you took the time to say, gosh, that's so interesting. Tell me more, Sally, about that. I don't understand. Could you help me clarify that? I must be missing something, and that job, I could tell you another story about a vacation home that was very similar. But the conversation was facilitated by the financial advisor, because the husband was saying, I don't get it. My wife's going on about building a second home. And in fact, it'll take 10 seconds, not 10, but 30. Like, my wife's going on about building a second home. CEO of a major publicly traded company that you would all actually recognize. Wife's going on about a second home. Finally, the advisor is like, let's just have a conversation about it. Says to the wife, like, hey, building a second, they had a beautiful second home in Hawaii. Beautiful. And building a third. So it'd be like a second home. And the advisor was like, that would put a real strain on the financial plan here. And she was like, seriously? You guys don't think I don't know that? Like, and she turns to her husband in the financial advisor's office and says, I'm trying to give you another chance. The kids and I, the first couple of years of going to that home in Hawaii, you were always so stressed that all we think about when we think about going to Hawaii is you yelling. And I'm trying to give you another chance. Of course, we're going to sell the Hawaii house. We're building a new one to give you another chance. And suddenly, and that was facilitated by the advisor, suddenly the husband, of course, is like, oh, of course. Like, how, turns to the advisor, could we please make that happen? So that, to me, is that empathy, the listening, the asking the good questions, the oxytocin you're talking about. This is not woo-woo California stuff.
No.
It's actually chemical, like this happens. So asking good questions, I don't care if curiosity kills the cat in the UK. What I care about is how good I know you feel as a human when somebody asks you a question. Now, maybe we have to be a little bit more crafty, like a little bit more skilled. One of the things I loved about being in the UK is people were skilled at conflict. Like, I would listen to arguments and I would be like, whoa, in the United States, this would be a fight now. Somebody would be throwing punches and you're giving each other high fives afterwards. Skilled. So maybe we have to be a little bit more skilled at our ability to ask interesting questions, maybe. But you're skilled at dialogue. So anyway, I'm sorry for taking a long tangent, but that to me is what real planning is really all about.
I love that. That's spot on to me. That's exactly how, I am. 3.5 years ago, I did a 12-step process. So I was drinking a lot of alcohol and taking drugs to deal with my problems. Running a business, I was stressed. I was stuck in self. I felt awful. Suicidal. Not a nice place. Terrible relationships, all sorts. Business wasn't great. People in my business didn't like me very much. So I had to take a good hard look at myself. And I got mentored by a 12-step person, who took me through the 12-step process. And one of that part of the process is taking a good hard look at yourself. And he asks me fact-finding questions. He asks me questions with compassion, kindness, to help bring it out of me. So going through that process myself, understanding the power of somebody listening, identifying with some of the issues that I have, offering solutions and showing empathy was huge. And part of the step process is then to give back to others and to do it exactly that way. So what I've learned over the 3.5 years is the work comes when I give back to others, not when somebody did the work with me. The true work, the true change within me was when I could sit, forget me, and listen to that person, give my time up, empathy, understanding, start from the beginning again, and really kind of be leading with a question that's kind and compassionate to uncover and discover what somebody's internal trauma or past problems might well be that are leading them to use substances in a way to mask the reality of life. And that was such a powerful process for me to go through. And the way that you talk about what you do and the passion you have for good financial planning, it's so similar. It's just like empathy is everything. And the chemical reaction that you talk about, I've felt. It's why they say it's like a spiritual experience going through like a 12-step process, because the internal feeling you get, that feeling of something pummeling out of your chest when you feel fantastic, when you feel your self-worth fill up. You identify what self-worth actually feels like, not fake because you've chucked a load of booze down your throat or something like that. It's incredibly powerful. And then the connection that I've had with other men since doing it, and also leading into this Talk Club charity that I'm now a part of, which is a men's mental fitness charity, the power of communication, opening up and being the word I love at the moment, or two. I love compassion, the word compassion, showing compassion as a man. But one of my favorite words is vulnerability, being vulnerable, being allowed to be vulnerable in a safe space where you're not going to be judged. One of the worst low frequency things that we can do to anybody else is to judge them. And once you've got that in place and the trust comes, people open up and out it all flows. And that's when the true change happens. And those things we hold on to, those fears and those resentments leave us. And it's powerful stuff. And I felt it firsthand. And the way that you talk, and that's why I connected with you. You're coming across exactly like the type of guy I love. I love your whole approach to, and the beautiful thing about what it is that you do, it's so interchangeable. It's not just financial planning. You're just being a good human being. And being a good human being in any walk of life, in any business, whether or not you're dedicated to philanthropy, charity, whether or not you're a multi-million pound business owner, or you work in the coffee shop, it doesn't matter. What you're displaying is good characteristics of what a good person actually is, that lives their life with purpose from within. And that's the kind of beginning of change, isn't it? And that's the beginning of being happy and being content. And everything else is a byproduct of feeling good, happy, and content within. Is my take on what that is. I'm sort of been off on a bit of a tangent there, but
thank you. Amen.
It suits. One of the things that we come across a lot, what do you know about, and your thoughts are on, imposter syndrome? So lots of people will be listening to this podcast who might well be at the very beginning of their journey of becoming a financial planner, and they feel like they are an imposter. What's your experience around that, or the thoughts around that?
Yeah, I'm super familiar, and I've spent a lot of time with I call him, because I've embodied imposter syndrome. I have a little bobblehead actually that is my embodiment of imposter syndrome. Spent a lot of time with my friend imposter syndrome, and I have a slightly different take, and I've got to be clear that there are versions of imposter syndrome that are real syndromes that need to be treated professionally, and I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like a kind of a strain of fear that shows up. And the way the reason, to anybody who's feeling it, the reason you feel it is because you are an imposter, right? You're doing new and novel work. So I actually don't think of it as, and I see this a lot online, like I'm going to kill imposter syndrome or kick fear in the teeth, or, I don't know fear. Or I think I kind of feel the opposite. And the opposite is we talked a little bit about this earlier. I've structured my life now that the feeling that I call imposter syndrome or fear. So imposter syndrome to me is just a unique strain of fear. I want to expose myself to that feeling as often as possible. In fact, if I go a couple of days without feeling imposter syndrome, something's up. And so here's how I got to that conclusion. So I wrote this column for the New York Times every week for 10 years. And every week, on Thursdays when the deadline was, I'd have this experience, and my door at my old office, and it's actually the same here, my door was over my left shoulder. I'd be sitting so I'm in Park City, Utah. I'm not in New York City. I live in Park City. I'm a kid from the hills in Utah, divorced parents, never could focus, right? Like I got all that stuff in my head. Like my grades were terrible. I barely made it into the public, university that everybody got into. Like all of that stuff's in my head. And I'm doing something for the New York Times that involves Sharpie and cardstock. You know what I'm saying? Like in the hills in Utah. So I'd come in Thursday mornings and I would write I'd write the column, and then I'd have to illustrate it with a sketch. The column was called The Sketch Guy. So I'd illustrate it with a sketch, and the sketch involved, in the early days, it was just Sharpie and cardstock. And then I had this Fujitsu snap scanner. So I didn't even have like a proper flatbed scanner. I had this Fujitsu $99 snap scanner. And I would work on the sketch, and I would throw paper over my shoulders, and I would finally get one where I was like, oh, the deadline, oh geez, I got to do this. And I would put it in the Fujitsu snap scanner. I would hit, there was no music playing. There was no light coming through the windows. There was no inspiration. There was no feeling it. And I would scan it and I would send it off. And right when I would go to hit send on the email to my editor, I would feel this like over my left shoulder at the door. And my door was frosted glass. So you could make out that there was a person out there, but you couldn't tell anything about the person, male, female, who it was, anything. And the feeling I would have is that there was a person out there and that they were going to open the door. And they would open the door in my mind. They would open the door and they would look in the door and they would be like, what is going on in here? Do they know that you're a kid from the hills? That's cardstock? Are you using a snap scanner? Like, wait till they find out. And he'd close the door. And the other version of it is that he would come in, and I ended up embodying this person. It looked like Mr. Burns, which is Homer Simpson's boss. So I have a bobblehead somewhere. It's in this box that the computer's on, that somebody who heard me tell this story sent me this bobblehead of Mr. Burns. So if Mr. Burns doesn't show up in my life, so the other version would be Mr. Burns would come all the way in, and there was a big switch on the wall, like the big electric, like train switches. And it said Carl's career, and the switch is in the on position. And Mr. Burns would reach up, look at me and cackle, and then just flip it to the off position. That was what went on every Thursday. And so then I would travel. I remember one of the first experiences was in South Africa, speaking at some big event. It was a 3,000 seat theater stadium. And, I walked in to do the sound check and was just like, what is going on? Do they know? Like, there's no way. I felt that in the UK. I felt that in the work that I did today. I was like, oh my gosh, there's 7 podcast interviews scheduled today. What am I going to possibly add that's valuable? I feel that all the time. And I was like, that's so interesting. Why is that? Then one day I was kayaking, whitewater kayaking in New Zealand. And I was just about to push off the shore into this pretty scary river. And I had the same feeling. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then I was like, wait, where else have I had that feeling? And I was like, oh my gosh, at my marriage. Oh my gosh, at the birth of every one of my kids. So then I was like, wait a second. Mr. Burns was at every cool event in my life. Like, if I looked at the picture of the people that were at every event, Mr. Burns was in that picture. And then I was like, well, why do I want him to go away? Why don't I instead welcome in Mr. Burns? Like, I'm glad you're here. Let's get to work. So now when I look over my shoulder and I see that door, I'm like, I go open it and say, hey, brother, I'm glad you're back, right? Let's get to work. Now, the key, of course, is Mr. Burns, Elizabeth Gilbert says this. He doesn't say Mr. Burns, but fear can come on the trip. They just can't drive, right? Fear has saved my life before. I don't want to kick that person in the teeth. So that's how I've transformed my experience with imposter syndrome. Now, some days I'm just too tired. And Mr. Burns shows up and I'm like, not today, brother. I think I'm going to go take a nap. But most days I'm like, let's get to work. I'm so glad you're here. So that, to me, I wouldn't think of imposter syndrome as bad. I would think of it as, hey, you're about to do something cool. It may not work. And that's okay, because guess what? If it doesn't work, you won't die. That's the part we have to change about Mr. Burns. Or imposter syndrome was, Mr. Burns is coming from a genetic, hereditary place where Mr. Burns is saying, if you leave the tribe, you're going to get eaten by a lion. And that was true. But it's no longer true. So I love to look over at Mr. Burns and go, hey, bro, I'm just writing an email. Everything's fine. Even if this goes bad, nobody's going to die. I'm just giving a talk. What's the worst that can happen? Nobody's going to shoot me. I'm not going to die. So I think if we can just transform a little bit of the edges of Mr. Burns, then we can say, gosh, brother, welcome back. Let's get to work.
Yeah. That cognitive distortion, isn't it? It's just
I think it's important to remember it. It served a purpose. It kept us alive as a species.
Yeah.
And in some cases, it still does.
Mm.
Fear has saved my life. I know I can point to specific instances where that feeling has been like, don't ski that slope. Right. And then we've seen avalanches. Don't do that. Like, I know fear has said, don't get in that car as a teenager. Right. Awesome. But I'm just writing an email. Different relationship.
And fear can be a fantastic motivator, eh?
Yeah. I just love turning fear into fuel.
Yeah.
And that takes, like, we didn't have time to talk about it, but I know some of the work you're doing is around like mental health. That fear into fuel takes you can only take so much of that without rest. Proper food, exercise outside, time in cold water, good sleep, like some of those basic things that, you can find on the internets. But if you're going to play that game, you've got to rest. You've got to be well resourced, right? And when you feel yourself being not well resourced, it's time to say, it's part of my job. Like, I have to convince my wife, I'm like, this nap is work. This is part of my job. My time in the mountains, I know everybody thinks that's cute that you spent 17 hours in the mountains last week. That's so irresponsible. You could have been working. I was.
I hear you.
Right. So anyway, that's all I've got to say on that subject.
Yeah, definitely relatable. I can totally fully understand that.
Yeah.
So we've come to the end. We've run out of time with you. But it's been an absolute pleasure bringing you on the Financial Planner Life podcast. It's my first experience of talking to you and listening to you. And I love what you're about. It's so refreshing to talk to you. So, Paul, any questions? Anything else to sign off on?
No, I think that's been fantastic, Carl. It was, I think, as Sam said, it's been an absolute privilege. So thank you for your time.
Cheers, my friends. That was really, really fun. It's I do a lot of these, and it's obvious that you're a pro. So thanks for taking the time to do that, because it makes the experience so great. So cheers.
Next time you're in London, I'll buy you a beer in the Holly Bush.
There you go. I would love that. We want to get back so bad. We left pretty, abruptly. We came home for a 2-week trip. We left food in the fridge in the flat there in Hampstead, and didn't come back right in the middle of the pandemic. We were like, why are we, like, we're here with family and, all the things that we were so far away from our kids. So, we haven't been back, and it's in the plans next summer. So
awesome.
Carl,
cheers.
Firm believer that the universe puts people in contact with me for a reason. And I 100% believe there's something else that you and I can do together. So I just want to put that out into the universe and to let you know that. And I'm hugely grateful for your time today. And I just want you to know that, I hope you have a fantastic rest of the week, fantastic rest of the day, and a fantastic life. And thank you so much for joining me. Real pleasure.
Yeah. Cheers, Sam. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
See you later. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.